Hello from Toronto. My name is John Keogh, and welcome to the Future of Food 10 by 10 Expert Series. And in this series, I'll speak with 10 experts for 10 minutes and ask them for their perspectives on the key challenges and the key opportunities in the food industry. And today I'm delighted to have with me from the UK, Peter Wareing. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, John. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Now, Peter, the 10 minutes goes very, very quickly. So in the first minute, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you actually do in the market?
Right, yes, I'm a food safety professional. I've got about 30 years of experience. I'm also a food mycologist, so that means I work with businesses around dried foods, confectionery, soft drinks, alcoholic drinks, also baking products. But I've also worked in ready meals, dairy, and so on. And the businesses I work with are everything from startups to SMEs, right the way through to multinationals, very large multinationals. And one of the other things I do is expert witness work. So that tends to be quite interesting and quite challenging, sorting out the problems with those sort of projects.
That's wonderful. And Peter, in your 30 years, what have you seen as the consistent challenges that the food industry has?
I think really food fraud has been a consistent issue. We didn't used to call it food fraud, but I think over the years it has become increasingly a problem. And I think criminals have seen, for one thing, that it's a relatively unpoliced area that you can actually make money from, rather than some of the more unpleasant things like drugs and so on. So there's a lot of criminal activity going into it. And generally a lack of traceability. And I was only looking today actually on the FSA's website, and salmonella. There are salmonella in nuts coming up. There's a lot of recalls due to salmonella in nuts. So the good old fashioned microbiological issues are still there, and also increasing, well, continuing issues with allergens as well, so-called undeclared allergens. So you've forgotten to put it on the label. You've maybe changed the product and you've forgotten to change the label for that product. So you've got an allergen in there which you didn't declare.
Well, there are some significant issues there for sure with food fraud, traceability, allergens, and so on. Now, if you take in that those challenges are current issues, what do you believe are the key opportunities that the food industry should or must work on?
Well, I think it must improve its traceability, and there have been a lot of issues around that over the last few years. We've talked about blockchain and other forms of electronic traceability, but certainly better traceability for the food industry is a key, so we can improve our integrity. And then one other sort of topical issue that's come up is alternative proteins. For example, insect proteins, plant-based proteins, algal, microbiological proteins, going meat-free, as it were. People are very concerned about the environment, about their carbon footprint. So their kind of corporate social responsibility side, how to be greener, in other words, is an issue which the consumer is certainly interested in, and more companies are interested in providing those sorts of products.
Wonderful. I want to circle back, Peter, to the challenge that you mentioned. Can we talk a little bit more about food fraud? What are you seeing happening? And are there products that are more vulnerable to food fraud than others?
There are certain areas. Well, one would be if there's been let's say, a weather effect, and you've got a very specialized ingredient, like say nutmeg or mace coming from the Caribbean. If you have a bad weather effect, then obviously the crop's destroyed or partially destroyed. Where do you get the mace from? So substitutions come in there. And then I know it's a kind of a standard joke, but there's more olive oil produced than virgin olive oil than is actually harvested. There's more Manuka honey harvested than is actually, sorry, sold than is harvested. So those are the areas. And of course, going back a few years, meat is still there have been still recently some issues with meat fraud again. And that's been something that's come up, as you know, over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, another challenge that you mentioned is the area of allergens or undeclared allergens. In this day and age, with the technology that we have, with the standards, with the food safety protocols, why is that still occurring?
Human error. Human error, because I think what people you will have, say, two products, one of which has an allergen in it and the other one doesn't, and you forget to change the label over between the products, and so the wrong label is put on the product, or an ingredient is accidentally put into that product which looks similar to another ingredient, but they've used it, or subsequently they've discovered they've contaminated that ingredient by putting it back into store, let's say, and then bringing it out again, they've realized they've contaminated it, so then they have to do a recall. But often it's just simply they've put the wrong label on it.
Gotcha. Now, in the opportunities, you mentioned a few things like improving traceability, improving integrity. Do you have some examples of what tangible things that companies can do today to improve the integrity of their supply chain, improve the quality of their traceability?
Well, they can interrogate their supply chain to make sure that they are getting what they say they're getting. They need to look online. They need to look on alerts, the food fraud and food safety databases to see are there particular countries or particular ingredients that are subject to fraud and things like that, for example. And then internally themselves, they can make sure they've got good traceability. There are, as I said, there are some electronic measures that have been put in place. Some people have been looking at blockchain. That's not the whole solution. It's one tool, though, that could be used. But any other forms of electronic tagging, electronic marking, for example, and better software solutions to make sure you trace your ingredients going into your products, going out to the customer.
Gotcha. And do you believe that, we talked today about, as you mentioned, blockchain and other technologies, and that being just a component, and of course, technology is a tool. But do you believe or do you see the role for laboratory type technology in miniaturization going out into the field? So at vulnerability points in the supply chain, you can actually do mobile testing. Now, of course, it'll never be the same quality or level as what you can do in a laboratory, but do you think that can give us an early warning system that something may be wrong with the product?
That's a really good question. There are two issues to that. One is that your so that'd be like a lab on a chip type machine. Yeah, those have been produced, or they have prototypes have been produced. The issue is going to be you may be looking for a small component of the fraud, let's say, small part of the ingredients you're looking at, and if you miss it in your sampling, then you're going to miss it in your testing. So I guess the size of you know the protocol you take for your sampling is going to be key, because otherwise you won't discover what you're looking for. But if you're looking for, let's say, is this the right type of tomato, is this the right type of onion, this is the right type of, I don't know, the right breed of whatever else ingredient it is, then yes, maybe and in the field process and in the field machine could actually work quite well for that, to prove the provenance of the actual raw ingredient before it's been processed. Once it's been processed, it's difficult to know what you've got.
Gotcha. Now, I had a conversation recently with a senior vice president of a company here in Canada, a food company, and I asked him the question, do you have risk profiles for countries of origin where you source products? And I was quite surprised with his answer. He said, no, we have countries that are maybe high risk, less developed, and less robust regulatory frameworks. But he said to me that if the company is GFSI certified, then he said, I'll accept the products. Do you think that's the right strategy?
Yes and no. I did some work when I used to work for a company called Leatherhead Food Research, and so our members would ask questions. And a few years ago, I was asked a question from a confectionery importer. They were getting products made in China for them. They were novelty confectionery products. I investigated 10 of their suppliers from China, and I found two of them had actually put fraudulent certificates in place. So their number, when you looked on the BRC website, it wasn't the same company. So they put fraud, they'd photoshopped their certificate basically, and the end of the process was that they went from 10 to 2 suppliers. They could not trust the other 8 suppliers in the end. So possibly yes, but and of course that's with remote auditing, as it were, rather than going on site and checking it out. But there are flaws there, as you can see.
And you raise a very, very important point that I think we should discuss just very briefly. Food fraud is not only about the product itself, it can be the documentation and it can be other things around it. It can be certifications or qualifications or a government document. Are you seeing that as well?
Yes, and as I said, from that country, yes, that did happen. It has happened in other places as well. So yes, there is only one real answer, and that is actually to go out and do the audit yourself, or get a trusted supplier to do the audit. And again, you have to be careful, because some third-party auditors in certain countries may not do as an efficient a job, let's say, as they could do from, let's say, a country like the UK, Canada, US, and so on, things like that.
Gotcha. And I think blockchain offers us actually quite a good, unique opportunity in this case, where the authoritative source of the actual certificate can be included. So it comes from the original party rather than from the custodian source, which may be the brand or someone that's trying to defraud. Peter, in the last minute or so, if you were up in front of 50 startup CEOs, what guidance would you give them?
Well, I'd say that you need to be passionate about your product, know your USP and how you're going to sell it. Um, I would then say you need to know your market. And finally, I would say always make sure your product is safe. You might have a novel product, it might be very good, but you've got to always look for the safety of that, the safety and the quality and integrity of that product, to make sure you're selling a safe product to the consumer. There have been some companies that have done shortcuts on things, and I've gone in and advised them and said, you can't make that product in that way. It won't actually work. Sorry, you can't have a fresher product with with less preservatives in it, less processed. It won't actually work. You have to process it or add the ingredients or add the preservatives in, and so on.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you go. There you have it from Peter Wareing in the UK. Food safety and the integrity of products, absolutely critical. Peter, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this morning.
Thank you, John. That was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.